Then they reached Jericho, and as Jesus and his disciples left town, a large group followed him. A blind beggar named Bartimaeus was sitting beside the road. When Bartimaeus heard that Jesus of Nazareth was nearby, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." "Be quiet," many of the people yelled at him, but he only shouted louder, "Son of David, have mercy on me." When Jesus heard him, he stopped and said, "Tell him to come here." So they called the blind man. "Cheer up," they said. "Come on, he's calling you." Bartimaeus threw aside his coat, jumped up, and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked. "My rabbi," the blind man said, "I want to see." And Jesus said to him, "Go, for your faith has healed you." Instantly the man could see, and he followed Jesus down the road.
Okay, the Big Three train rolls on. If you've not been here, this is your first time with us. We've been doing a series that we're calling the Big Three. Here's the basic idea. We all, as human beings, we're not like other animals. We want to flourish in life. We don't just want quantity of life. We want quality of life. Historically, different words have been used to describe that: fullness, abundance, happiness, well-being, flourishing, right? We all get up every day. We want to have the biggest, best life we can have. But to flourish as people, you got to make meaning of your existence. And whether you realize it or not, the process of meaning making is a process of asking and answering questions. There are all kinds of questions that we have to ask and answer in order to really feel like we're flourishing as people. In this series, we're naming the Big Three. Okay, so these are not the only questions that people ask, but from my perspective right now, these are probably the big three questions that you got to ask, and of course, more importantly, you got to find a satisfactory answer to them. So what we're doing is there's a question behind each door, we're unveiling the questions one at a time, and then we're spending a period of weeks bringing those questions to Jesus and reflecting on how he might or did answer them. So the question behind door number one was the question of identity. Who am I? We saw that to flourish as people, you got to know who you are and you got to like what you know. And from Jesus' perspective, the fundamental answer to that question is child of God. So you go out into the world, and the world either implicitly or explicitly is teaching you, telling you all the time that you are A, B, and C, or you're not D, E, and F. Our identities are under constant kind of assault and upheaval. And Jesus would say the truest thing about you when everything else fails and fades away, you're my son, you're my daughter. That is the truest thing about you. It always has been, and it always will be. That is who you are. So that's the question of identity. The second question, the question we've been exploring the last 2 weeks, and I'm going to close the door on today. We're going to say everything there is to say, nothing else to be said on this topic. It is the question of community. To whom do I belong? Human beings are hyper-social creatures. We're like bees. We need a tribe to belong to in order to flourish. We all long to belong. The big idea I have tried to communicate the last 2 weeks is we don't long to belong simply because experience tells us that belonging is good for us. We all know that. Belonging is good for us. It confers all kinds of positive benefits. Not belonging correlates to all kinds of negative outcomes. We know that. We can observe that. We can study it in different ways, measure it in different ways. Belonging is not important simply because we have learned through experience that it's good for us. It is good for us because it coheres with our nature. That from a Christian perspective, who you are as a person is inseparably bound up with the people to whom you belong. Who you are is your relationships, and there's a reason for that. You are made in the image of a God who is a relationship of persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So God's identity is essentially relational. You are made in the image of that God. Ipso facto, you are essentially relational. So the question of who am I is inseparably bound up with the question, to whom do I belong? You can distinguish them, which we're doing in this series. You can't separate them. Who you are is to whom you belong. To flourish, we have to be in relationship because that's who we are. That's what it means to be human. But because our need for belonging is rooted in the nature of the God who created us, how we pursue belonging also has to be rooted in the nature of that God. So I've tried to lift up this idea that we are the most connected human beings who have ever existed on the planet, and yet the statistics regarding loneliness and depression and suicide are off the charts. And so at least on one level, that suggests a lot of people feel like they're connected, but don't have this deep sense that they belong, or belonging is not really satisfying their soul. And I have a hunch that's because we fundamentally misunderstand the nature of belonging. A lot of us, and I am not immune to this, we look to other people or to our communities or to the people to whom we belong as a source of affirmation and recognition. Belonging is primarily about us, and it's what the community does for us. But in the nature of God, belonging is about self-donating. The nature of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is that the persons of the Godhead donate themselves to one another. It's a perfect self-emptying. Belonging happens when you and I see community as a place to self-donate, not primarily as a place for kind of self-recognition or self-affirmation. It's a place to donate, to give of ourselves, to serve rather than be served, to borrow language from Jesus. And paradoxically, when you see it that way, you end up experiencing this deep sense of I belong here. These are my people. And of course, that confers on you all the positive benefits that are supposed to come along with belonging. So that's where we've been. What I wanted to do to close the door on this topic this morning, I want to take a practical turn. So we're going to end this by talking about something we can do. So remember way back at the end of the who am I question, the practical turn was Sabbath keeping, Sabbath rest. So you go out into the world every day, all week long, your identity's under assault. The one thing that you can do is just come here every week. Just make it a point to be here. And when you're here every week, week after week after week after week, you are reinforced in this idea that you belong to God. And we need to be reminded of that. So one thing you can do to reinforce that who am I question, that I am a child of God, just show up. Just be here and let the message, the good news that the church has for the world, just let it wash over you and reinforce that every week. I want to do the same thing today by talking about one thing we can do to self-donate. Again, we all long to belong. Belonging comes when people self-donate, give of themselves. What's one thing we can do? Like I did not label this morning's message, 25 ways to build healthy relationships. You wouldn't remember 25 things. You can't do 25 things. I could have made the word relationships like an acronym and, every letter could have had a thing. One thing. This one thing is so seemingly simple. It is accessible to everyone, all of us, all the time. It doesn't require education. It doesn't require resources. Everybody can do this. It doesn't matter what age you are, your circumstances. We can all do this one thing. And in my experience, as a person in contemporary Western culture, this one thing might be the most important thing that we can do to cultivate belonging. And that one thing is attention. It's to pay attention. More specifically, it is to give another person your attention. Simone Weil says that attention is the rarest form of generosity. It's the rarest form of generosity. Attention is an act of generosity, obviously, because it's an act of the will. For most of us, I recognize that there are some people for whom focusing your attention is harder than others. So that is not to discount that. And obviously there are people for whom this does not apply. But for most of us, most of the time, where you focus your attention is an act of the will. You don't have to do it. You don't have to put your attention here or there or some other place. You have to choose to put your attention there. And in that way, it is an act of generosity. Wherever you're choosing to put your attention, you are engaged in an act of grace, of generosity. As you sit right here, right now, there is going to come a moment, I'm sure, over the course of this sermon, where your mind's going to start to wander. And you're going to have to work and fight to go, you know what? No, I'm going to be here. I'm going to pay attention here, right now. Right? That's an act of grace. It's an act of generosity, okay? But Weil calls it a rare form of generosity. Okay, so an act of attention, giving your attention to another person, right? If you're not donating money, you're not donating material things, you're not donating labor, you're donating self. That's what charity is. It is a giving of the self. So giving attention to someone is an act of self-donation. In fact, it might be the simplest or the most basic form of self-donation, but Weil calls it the rarest. And you all probably would corroborate that account. Generosity or giving attention to somebody, it's a rare thing these days. I don't know who said it. I read someone said it somewhere. So this is not me. Somebody said somewhere that contemporary Westerners, that in our culture, that we have a problem thinking about what isn't happening. Thinking about what isn't happening. What the author meant was we have a tendency to spend quite a bit of our mental lives, our mental energies, our internal worlds, not being here, right now, in this moment, because we are either preoccupied with the past, we are living in the past. Something happened back there, and we're just living there. Or we're anticipating, maybe worrying about the future. Now, obviously, being able to reflect on the past and anticipate the future, these are remarkably important. This is a remarkably important capacity for human beings. This is how we make meaning of our lives. I read a book a couple years ago called Moonwalking with Einstein. It was a book about memory and the ancient act of like the memory palace and how to like memorize stuff. One of the chapters in the book were the case studies on people who have lost memory, either because of a traumatic injury or a disease that attacked that part of their brain. I mean, movies have been made of it, like 50 First Dates, I think I'm remembering, where you just get up every day and you don't remember what happened the next day. If you cannot remember what happened the day before, then you cannot anticipate what's coming tomorrow. And literally every day becomes a kind of meaningless existence to you. You can't make meaning. You're there, you're existing, you're living, but you can't make meaning of your existence. So our ability to reflect on the past and anticipate the future is really important. It is how we make meaning of our lives. But the past and the future are supposed to be like vacation homes. You're supposed to visit them for a short time and then leave. You're not supposed to live there. And the reason you go there, right, is in order to maximize the present moment. The reason that we reflect on the past and we try to anticipate the future is so that we know what to do right now. That we can make the best possible use of this time here, right now, in this moment. Because right now, this moment is the only life there is. There is no life in the past, and there's no life in the present. There is only life here, right now. So all of our reflecting on the past and anticipating the future is supposed to be so that we can be here as best we can be here. That's not how a lot of us treat that. That's not how a lot of us see the past and the future. Where most of us do not live in the past or live in the future as a way of maximizing the present. Most of us are living in the past or living in the future in order to escape the present. We're trying to figure out how not to be wherever we happen to be. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, the reasons for why, again, you just be honest with yourself. I'm be honest with myself. I find a lot of moments in my daily life where I do not want to be where I am. I wish I were elsewhere. Never when I'm talking to you, only when I'm talking to someone else. And you're like that too, I'm sure. This to me is like, it's just an observation of my own life. A lot of us just want to escape the present moment. There are a million reasons for that. It's pace of life, it's pain, it's trauma, it's boredom, it's whatever. That is a sermon or a sermon series for another time. Why we want to escape, sermon for another time. That we want to escape, that just feels like an observational fact to me. And I don't think anybody is immune from this. And of course, you and I, we live in a day and age now where you got technology in your pocket. The technology is not the problem. It's just that the technology makes something we already want to do that much easier to do. If escaping is what you want to do, you got an easy opportunity sitting in your pocket. And we've all witnessed it. You've done it. I've done it. It's two people sitting at a restaurant and their, eyes are down, glued at their phones. You can watch teenagers do this. It's almost comical if it weren't said. You can see whole groups of kids sitting in a car or sitting at a game or even at somebody's house. I've watched this happen in my own home where you'll get groups of teenagers around each other and they're all like this and nobody's talking to each other. This, of course, is not a kid problem. Kids learn things from adults. How many times have you found yourself scrolling through whatever, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, Snapchat, your favorite sports blog, whatever, who cares? We got a name for this. It's called fubbing. Careful how you say that. Have you heard this phrase? Fubbing. It's snubbing someone with your phone. So you're sitting in a space. This is a lot of times you see this in the context of married couples. It's at night and you're in bed and it's your only time to talk to each other and one of you just going like this, right? Fubbing, snubbing each other with your phone. Right? Again, the phone's not the problem. It's just we want to escape. We just don't want to be there in that moment. For whatever the reason, we just find ways to not be there, either by living in the past or living in the future or distracting ourselves with our phone, whatever. Attention. Paying attention. This unique capacity that human beings have to be able to give one another our focus has become so rare. This is the rarest form of generosity. And yet, because it is so rare, it has once again become so powerful. Western culture, not because it's been diagnosed psychologically, Western culture has attention deficit disorder. It's just a way of being in the world. And so focusing our attention on one another, on people, has become so rare that it has there's real power in it. If a group of people could just commit to this one thing that is accessible to you all the time, right in front of you, just imagine how different people's experience in relationships would be if we just committed to giving each other our attention. This to me, when I read the life of Jesus, this is it was a basic conviction of his. I chose the story that I chose this morning because of the stark contrast between how Jesus responds and how his devoted followers respond. Not because this was an isolated event. What Jesus does in this story, Jesus did all the time. It says he and his disciples arrive at the town of Jericho, and as they're leaving, a blind beggar named Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, calls out to Jesus, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Characters don't always get named in the Bible, especially characters like Bartimaeus. It'd be very easy to not name a blind beggar, because at the end of the day, what does it matter? Who cares what his name is? Jesus did. The reason you know that guy's name is because someone stopped and talked to him. And in that conversation, probably asked him, "Hey, what's your name? Where'd he come from?" And that became part of the story. This guy gets a name because somebody cared. So many of the people that we run into in our lives never get a name because we never cared enough to ask. This guy gets a name. He calls out to Jesus, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." I think it's important that the story says they were leaving town. So the first verse is they got to town, and then it says they were leaving town. Between those two sentences, I think a whole day happened. So I want you to imagine Jesus is in Jericho all day, teaching in the synagogue, because that was his custom. It is now the end of the day. He and his disciples are leaving town, probably to go out to camp in the neighboring area. So it is the end of the day. He is probably tired. He is probably hungry. This is the worst conceivable moment for most people to be asked to donate their attention. Right? This is the end of the day. I can just speak from my experience right now as a father of young children. That this is the end of the day and you've gotten to the hour-long hostage negotiation that is bedtime? And you're just trying to figure out, how do I get out of this room as quickly as possible so that I can get 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes of my own time before I pass out? And this is the moment that your child has chosen to tell you all of his deepest, darkest fears and secrets right now. Or maybe not. Maybe this is just the moment he has decided, oh, Dad, let me tell you the story. My friends and I, yesterday, we were playing Fortnite, and this super funny thing happened, and blah, 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 blah. And all you can think is, I wish I had one of those laser cannons from Fortnite so I could shoot myself right now. I just want to get out of this room. This is the moment my child has chosen to demand my attention. And we all have these experiences. End of the day, it's late. You're tired. You've been working hard. You've been running like crazy. This is the worst moment for anybody to be asked to donate their attention. And yet this is when Bartimaeus decides to call out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And of course, you notice what all of Jesus' supposedly devoted followers, what they do. And again, this was not unique in this scenario. They did this quite a bit. Bartimaeus calls out, and all of Jesus' followers, his entourage, all of the faithful, their response is, be quiet. Leave him alone. Don't you know he's tired? Don't you know he's hungry? Don't you know he's important? Don't you know he has places to go and things to do and people to see? He's a very important person. They don't say it, but what they should have said, what would have been honest, is whatever your name is, you're just not that important. Because that was the message. The message was, whoever you are, you just don't matter enough. At least to us. But not to Jesus. Bartimaeus isn't deterred, and I think this is a central point to this story. Jesus' followers tell him to be quiet. Bartimaeus says again, Son of David, have mercy on me. And this is when Jesus chooses to speak up. This is when, after Bartimaeus said it the second time, that's when Jesus says, hey, call him. Of course, all the faithful at that point are like, oh, that's what we meant, Jesus. Here, come on, Bartimaeus. Come on. Jesus is calling you. Yeah, that's what we meant. He waits for the second time. And I think this is important. Later in the story, Jesus heals him of his blindness, and he says, your faith has healed you. When Jesus doesn't respond the first time, I don't think it's because he didn't hear him. This strikes me as one of those moments where Jesus was just going to see what happened. He just chooses not to speak up. His entourage just said something remarkably stupid that does not reflect him at all. He doesn't intervene right away and be like, guys, come on, have I been teaching you nothing? He lets this play. He wants to see what Bart does. Is Bartimaeus the kind of guy who assumes Jesus is the kind of guy or the kind of God who will give him his attention, even though nobody else will? Does Bartimaeus believe that even though he's not important to anyone else, apparently, will he be important to Jesus? Will Jesus stop and give him his attention? And of course, Jesus is. Because that is who God is. I want you to think about how remarkable this is, right? The God who created the heavens and the earth. He stops, and I want you to imagine this being you. The God of the universe, the God who created the heavens and the earth, he stops, and he gives you his attention, and then he asks the most remarkable question. What do you want me to do for you? How can I help you? What do you have going on in your life? What's happening with you? How can I help? How can I step in? How can I add value to you? How can I help you with what you have going on? That's amazing. That the God who creates the heaven and the earth sits and talks to one of his children, and it's not a demand, it's not a command, right? It's not a me-focused kind of thing. It's a, how can I help you? What do you have going on? So for right now, for this moment, my whole world is going to be about you and whatever you need and whatever you have going on. That's amazing. And of course, Bartimaeus says, I want to see, because what blind person wouldn't say that? And Jesus says, okay. And he heals him. And of course, the guy's life has changed, and he follows Jesus on down the road. But the point is, when all of Jesus' followers don't care, when they're looking at other people, people in their household, people in their neighborhood, people in their workplace, right? When they're looking at people and they're going basically, you don't matter to me. You're not important enough to me to get my time or my attention. God is someone who says, yeah, I'll stop. What do you got going on? What do you need? But that's who Jesus reveals God is. God is someone who displays, embodies, gives, reflects love in the form of self-donation, in the basic form of attention. That you matter enough for me to actually pay attention to you. And this is not a one-off. Jesus did this all the time. All the time. He's teaching in a synagogue. A guy possessed by a demon walks in, as happens, and interrupts Jesus. And Jesus stops what he's doing, and he heals the guy. Another time he's teaching in a house, and the roof starts caving in. 4 of his disciples are digging a hole in the roof of the house, and they lower a guy who's paralyzed right in front of Jesus. Jesus stops what he's doing, and he heals the guy. One time, Peter takes him over to his mother-in-law's house. Jesus is trying to get some dinner. It's been a long day. And wouldn't you know it, walks in, and his mother-in-law is sick and in need of help. Jesus stops what he's doing, and he heals her. That same night, everybody in town found out, hey, did you know Jesus is over at Peter's mother-in-law's house? And he healed her. Bring all your sick. Come on. And they show up to Peter's mother-in-law's house. And the story says that Jesus spends the rest of the day healing them, long into the night. Goes to bed. He gets up the next morning. He just wants to pray. You know how that is, right? You just want to get up in the morning and pray. Jesus just wants to get up in the morning. He just wants to pray. No, it's not going to work. Peter shows up. Jesus, everybody's looking for you. Well, I had a feeling. Okay. And Jesus says, okay, come on. And they go to the next town, and they keep teaching. They keep doing their thing. One time he grabs his disciples, and they get in a boat, and they sail across a lake. They're like, I know, the lake will deter them. Let's put water between us and the people. They get in a boat and go across a lake. No such luck. Somehow these people managed to run around the lake faster than they could sail across it. By the time they hit the shore, there's this huge crowd of people there. And of course, the disciples do exactly what they do in this story. They're like, hey, Jesus, it's late. Everybody's hungry. Can we get rid of these people? And Jesus says, no. You feed them, right? They have the miraculous, feeding the 5,000. And then it says that Jesus stood there and taught them all day long. One time he takes them north. It actually leave the country. This is an international trip. They leave the country. Surely, if we just leave the country, nobody will know who I am. And then we'll be able to get a couple days alone. No. It just so happens that the house that they're going to stay in, there's a woman there who's heard of him, and she also happens to have a sick kid. So, okay. Jesus heals her daughter. And on and on and on it goes. He's on his way to heal a religious leader's child who has fallen ill, and on the way, a woman with some kind of bleeding condition stops him. Jesus doesn't say, you know what, I'd love to stay, but if I stay too long, it's not going to go well for the little girl. I got to be on my way. No, he stops and he heals her, and then he goes and he heals her over and over again. This is a regular feature of Jesus' life. Here's how I would say it. You and I, we are typically, and we will find reasons to be distracted from people. Jesus was never distracted from people. He was always distracted by them. People were the distraction, as if people were what mattered. That was the whole point. being distracted by people. When you look at Jesus' life, it just comes across as like, yeah, that's the whole idea. Rarest form of generosity, but it is the most basic form of love. Attention is the most basic form of love. It is the one thing we can all do. Doesn't matter what your age is or your occupation or how many kids you have, you don't have kids, or you're rich or you're poor. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. Everybody can give their attention as the most basic form of love, as the most basic form of self-donation. How do you do that? Well, the risk of a sermon like this is you all come in and I'm talking about like, hey, how do we become better at giving each other our attention, right? And the risk here is everybody walks out of here feeling like a pile of garbage, right? Like, I suck as a salesman, right? Here's why I'm not any good at this. That's why I'm trying to help anchor this in. Like, this is not, our God is a God who self-donates by giving us attention. I don't think anybody, at least I can't find it in any of the gospel stories. You have all had this experience. I've had this. I have done this to you. I apologize. You have done this to me. I accept your apology. You have done it to each other. Other people have done it to you in other places. We have all had the experience of standing or sitting somewhere and talking to someone and they are not there. Their bodies are there, but their minds and their hearts and their souls are elsewhere. And in those moments, you feel like you do not matter, that you are not important to that person right now. You have been the victim of that. You have also been the perpetrator of that. So stay off your high horse. We have all done this to each other. Okay? I don't think Jesus ever did this to anybody. I just cannot imagine anybody ever being with Jesus and having that experience of like, I'm walking with the Son of God. Hey, are you hello, Jesus? I'm here. I'm important. Are you focusing on me? I just don't think anybody had that experience of I'm not here. I don't matter. But if that's our God, if that's the God whose image we're made in and learning love, which is what we're doing here, is learning the God who is love, then that's what we're supposed to be growing up into. So it's not supposed to be a source of guilt or shame. It's supposed to be a goal. It's supposed to be something you look toward and you go, okay, I know where I'm going. And this is one thing I could actually mark in my life. To the degree that you find yourself constantly unable to be where you are and to give attention to the person who's right in front of you, that's a little spiritual litmus test for you. How can we be more like Jesus in this regard? Okay, one, you got to have that spiritual conviction. A shift has to happen in your life at some point. People are all that matter. Not climbing the ladder, not making money, not accomplishing the goals, not achieving stuff, not being known. People. People are all that matters. We will talk about this when I open door number 3 in a few weeks, when we talk about the topic of purpose. Sorry to let the cat out of the bag. But you get up every day and you have 100 purposes in your life. You have 100 things that you need to do today. But for the Christian person, all of our purposes come down to one purpose, always, and it's always people. People are all that matters. I had a conversation with someone in our church this week, and he was expressing to me concern that as we pursue this building project, as we pursue this brick and mortar, that we're going to lose sight of people, that the buildings are going to become more important to us than people are. And I walked away from the conversation and I thought, I was so grateful. I'm like, how awesome is it that we have people in this church like him who are focused on the right things? Because brick and mortar does not matter unless it is a tool that ultimately serves people. It's the only thing that matters. But believing that and living that is so hard. It is so hard. Some of you know that I substitute teach for the school system once a week on my days off. And I just, full disclosure, it's part of it's selfish. I mean, part of it's like I'm trying to serve because there's need, but I would really like to serve in as like whatever capacity will require the least of me, right? So like if I could sub at the high school where like the kids are all smart and they know what they're doing and I could just like sit and do my own stuff, money. Friday, the only sub job available is at the middle school. Intervention specialist at the middle school. And so I sign up for it. I ended up being a paraprofessional for a fifth grader with autism all day. All day I was hooked to this kid's hip, all day for 8 hours. Now I have a child with autism at home, so this is what I do every day of my life. And like a lot of you who are teachers or administrators and you show up to church on Sunday and you have graciously decided to teach our kids and there's that thought going through your head like this is the last thing in the universe I want to be doing on my day off because it's what I do for a living. That's how I felt on Friday. And all day long, it was just wave after wave after wave of the Spirit of God having to remind me as I was thinking one more time, I wish I was somewhere else. The Spirit of God saying, Mike, this is the only thing that matters. This kid right here, right now, you got nowhere else to be. You got nothing else to do. Just be here right now with this kid. No matter what happens. It's so hard to do. It's hard to do with our own children, with our spouses, with our friends. How often do you find yourself in a conversation with someone and you are thinking, I wish I was somewhere else? Jesus never thought that way. Never. But part of that was because when he looked at people, it's all that mattered. And that was just so anchored in his soul. People are all that matters. At some point, a shift has to take place in our soul, at least theoretically. Even if we're not living it yet, at least theoretically, we have to be committed to the idea that people are all that matters. Nothing else matters. Everything else comes back to how it serves people. You have to be convinced of that. And attention, you have to see attention as the most basic form of love. I love the fact that Bartimaeus asks Jesus for mercy because attention is mercy. It is charity. It is a form of love. It is a gift. If Jesus had never healed him, which of course he did, if Jesus had not healed Bartimaeus, just sitting with him and being present was mercy. Bartimaeus still would have gotten what he asked for. We were in South Bend last week, and we were at a park, and our kids were in this splash pad, and they were playing, and a person experiencing homelessness who clearly had mental health issues wandered over and sat down on a park bench, started talking to Carrie. And, initially Carrie was like, hi, whatever. And then this turned into a conversation, and the conversation went from 1 minute to 3 minutes to 5 minutes to 10 minutes to 20 minutes to 30 minutes. Carrie's, got hands on this woman, just praying for her. And of course, a lot of us are thinking, well, this is not how we expected to spend our afternoon. We just thought we'd come to the park for a little bit. I can't tell you how many times this woman, who in many ways was not in her right mind, how many times she very clearly articulated, thank you for sitting and talking to me. Thanks for giving me your attention. Nobody ever does that. And just like, it wasn't like Bartimaeus got healed. Good for him. Nothing miraculous happened in that story. Her life was still going to be the hardship that it was when she walked up, but that was a form of mercy. You have to believe that attention is a form of charity and generosity. It is a self-donation. It is going to cost you something. People are all that matters. And giving people your attention is the most basic form of love. And if you can get that conviction down into your soul, at least on some theoretical level, then you can start doing what's the real important work, right? The fleshing of it out, going like, if that's my value, then what am I doing with my life? What are my decisions? How am I organizing things? I look at my life and I think of my life like I'm wickedly good at managing time. But the fact that we talk about time as something that needs to be managed is a kind of fundamentally non-Christian way to talk about it. Time is not a commodity to be managed. It is the location where we experience God. Sometimes I look at my life and it's like a closet, and there are a million things in that closet, but I have organized it so well. Everything's got its place, and it's all hung up, and it's super clean. And of course, it took me 3 hours to do that. What it did not occur to me to do was to look at 80% of the junk that's in that closet and say, I don't even need to own that. Why am I spending my time organizing something I don't even need to have? Relationships are kind of like this, right? If you have the conviction that people are all that matters and love is a basic form of generosity or self-donation, then you got to start asking yourself, how do I, to the degree that I can, I know that everybody's life is different. Jesus was an itinerant rabbi, right? He walked around. If people interrupted him, that was just kind of part of the gig. His disciples could kind of come and go because their jobs were to fish, and if things don't work out, I'll just pick my nets back up and try again. We don't live in that world. I get it. And we don't all have the ability to totally control our lives. I understand that too. But we have a lot more control than we probably realize. What if we started asking ourselves questions like, how am I organizing my life so that I can be available to people, to give them my attention? So that should someone pop into my office or should my child want to have a conversation with me, I can. Because I've built my life in such a way that I can always pick up the thing that I had to put down for a minute. It'll get done because, maybe I just decided not to get so much done. Of course, that'll just take you longer to get it done, but where else are you going? So to have the conviction that people are all that matters and to go attention is the most basic form of love. Then everything else is Christian people. We have a whole formation group on this. Spending your time and money on what matters most. One of the things that you learn in that group is you already are spending your time and money on what matters most to you. Whether or not it should, it is. It's about realigning how we spend our time and money on what's supposed to matter most, which is people. People. Now, I know there's the tendency, right, to walk out and go, man, I'm just really an awful person because I don't give my attention to people. I'm with you in that. I'm with you in that. The hope is that you have a God who gives his attention to you as God's most basic form of love. That's the God you say you love and pledge your allegiance to. That's the God whose image you're growing up into. So it shouldn't be a difficult question to simply say, okay, that God loves me. How do I become more like that? What do I need to do in my life so that I can give my attention where my attention needs to be given? And that's to people. I know we all need breaks. You all need breaks from people. I do too. I get it. You all need breaks. We all need breaks, especially if you're a caregiver of some time. And this is a well-documented thing. Sometimes you got to get away from people. I understand. You know that that's not what I'm talking about. This message is not about not taking time for yourself because you're caring for someone. This message is about other people not mattering to you. Whether that's your spouse or your kids or your coworkers or your neighbors or your friends or your mother-in-law or whoever it is. This message is about something else being more important to you than the person who's right in front of you. If we want to experience the kind of belonging that we all long for, we have to cultivate that belonging for each other. Just think about what church would be like if everybody showed up to church every Sunday, and your principal thought was, I am here this morning as a member of the body of Christ to do a job. I have a role to play, a part to play. My job being here this morning is to donate myself to someone. If everybody's thinking about how do I donate myself to somebody, just imagine what our experience of community would be like. I think that's what God has in mind for human beings. That's what flourishing looks like. So let's self-donate, right, in the most basic form of love, the rarest way right now, and let's give each other our attention. Okay, we're going to finish our service this morning by taking communion. For those of you who are new here, we take communion every week together, and I want you to know that you're welcome to join us. The table's open. If you are someone who wants to follow Jesus, the table's open. Come be a part of the church. Be a part of the faith family that's trying to figure out how to be God's kids in the world. In just a minute, I'll dismiss you starting in the back rows. You'll come down our center aisle here. Our communion tables are on the sides of our stage. You'll take a prepackaged communion cup back to your seat, and then during this last song, you can take that as you feel led. Our table's open to you. It is a sacrament of remembrance. This morning, you are remembering that your God is a God who self-donates to you, fully and truly through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But when you take the bread that represents his broken body and the juice that represents his shed blood, you're participating in that life. You are entering into the life of Christ. You're becoming people whose lives are about self-donating to one another and to the world that God cares about. I'm going to invite you to stand. Let me pray for us, and we can come to the table. God, we thank you that you give yourself to us so graciously, that you always stop to pay attention to us, that we matter to you, as unbelievable as that is. Father, forgive us that we don't give each other the same basic act of love, form of love. Continue to teach us and shape us to be people who are generous in the way that we donate ourselves, our attention to one another. And I pray we all experience the kind of belonging you created us to have, and a belonging that makes space for others to come. We love you. We thank you. We entrust ourselves to you. Do this work. Give us spiritual power to do this work. In Jesus' name, amen.
brother. Forgiveness is the garment that I could